the headlines. Sudan Army recaptures headquarters of state broadcaster in Omdurman. Gaza, Israeli hostage actually killed in 7 October Hamas attacks. Japan residents warned to stay away from chemical-soaked cat. Ukraine, 3 paramilitary groups cross into Russia, fight government forces. United States government to send $300 million in military weapons to Ukraine. Mexico, 2 federal detectives found unharmed after they went missing. Content which was broadcast from elsewhere in the country. Ever since the war broke out, the Army and the RSF have battled for control of Khartoum and the nearby cities, despite the United Nations Security Council's call for the ceasefire during the holy month of Ramadan. Intense fighting has continued in several parts of the capital. People are very rejuvenated. There is a lot of sentiment attached to national radio, says the newsman. It is also a major defeat to the RSF. For the RSF, because they were using the radio headquarters as their stronghold. The Sudanese armed forces are going to milk this. It is a big victory for them. The conflict erupted last April following a agreement between the army's head, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and RSF Chief Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti, over an internationally backed political plan to move towards civilian rule. As well as displacing millions, the conflict has left Khartoum in ruins caused by humanitarian crisis and triggered ethnically driven killings in Darfur, in the west of the country. Several international attempts to broker a ceasefire have failed. Kenya is halting plans to deploy at least 1,000 police officers to Haiti following the unprecedented violence that erupted in the Caribbean nation and the announcement by its Prime Minister, Aaron Henry, that he would resign once a presidential council is created, a Kenyan official said Tuesday. Kenya had agreed last October to lead a UN-authorized international police force to Haiti, but the country's top court in January ruled this was unconstitutional, in part because of lack of reciprocal agreements on such deployments between the 2 countries. Kenya's President William Ruto said that he and Henry had witnessed the signing of the reciprocal agreements between Kenya and Haiti on March 1st, clearing the path for the development. Under the plan, the UN-backed multinational police, led by Kenyan officers, was to help quell gang violence that has long plagued Haiti, but violence escalated sharply since February 29, with gunmen burning police stations, closing the main international airports, and raiding the country's 2 biggest prisons, releasing more than 4,000 inmates. Scores have been killed and more than 15,000 are homeless after fleeing neighborhoods raided by gangs, food and water are dwindling, and the main port in the capital of Port-au-Prince remains closed, stranding dozens of containers with critical supplies. After returning from a trip to Kenya where he had gone to salvage plans for the African country's deployment, Henry has been locked out of his own country and has remained in Puerto Rico since last week. It is true the planned police deployment of police officers has put on hold, Kenya's Foreign Affairs Principal Secretary Korir Singwell said Tuesday. There has been a fundamental change in circumstances in Haiti as a result of the incomplete breakdown of law and order, Singwell added. Henry's announcement Tuesday that he would resign once the transitional presidential council is created that indicated he was bowing to international pressure to make way for new leadership in the country overwhelmed by violent gangs. A dual U.S.-Israeli citizen who was earlier believed to be held hostage by a jihadist was actually killed in the 7 October attack by Hamas, according to the Israel Defense Forces. Itai Chen was a soldier for the IDF serving near the Gaza border. The 19-year-old's body was taken by Hamas after he was killed and remains in Gaza, the IDF said on Tuesday. More than 100 Israeli hostages are still thought to be held alive by Hamas. The war began when Hamas gunmen attacked southern Israel on 7 October, killing about 1,200 people and seizing 253 hostages. More than 31,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's retaliatory airstrikes and in its ongoing ground offensive, the Hamas-run health ministry says. President Joe Biden said he and First Lady Jill Biden were devastated to learn of Chen's passing. Today our hearts are heavy, he said in a statement. I reaffirm my pledge to all the families of those still held hostage. We are with you. We will never stop working to bring your loved ones home. Mr. Biden and Chen's father and brother came to the White House in December to share the agony and uncertainty they have faced as they prayed for the safe return of their loved one. No one should have to endure even one day of what they have gone through, Mr. Biden said in a statement. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum said it shared in the profound grief of the Chen family. Itai loved the land, going on hikes, and was a senior instructor in the youth movement. A salt of the earth person, the group wrote in X. Chen had decided to work at his base on the Gaza border on 7 October to get time off for his brother's bar mitzvah, a ceremony that marks the transition into Jewish adulthood. His family lost communication with him after he told them his base was under attack. No one has been able to physically locate him. He is not in a hospital, not on the deceased list, his father, Ruby Chen, said at a news conference after the attacks. Residents of a city in western Japan have been warned to stay away from a cat after it fell into a tank of poisonous chemicals. The warning comes after a factory worker found yellow paw prints leading away from the container. Security footage was then reviewed that the cat could be seen running away, leaving a trail of paw prints. Officials in Fukuyama have asked the public to stay away from the animal and report any sightings to the police. It is thought the curious feline had been in a vat of hexavalent chromium, a highly acidic and carcinogenic chemical, which is orange and brown in color. A member of staff found the paw marks when they arrived for work yesterday at the Nomura Plating Fukuyama factory, according to news website Asahi. Fukuyama City's environmental team warned the public not to touch a cat that seems abnormal, but also said the animal might have died as a result of the incident. The company which owns the factory said the tank had been covered by a sheet, but that part of it had reportedly been turned over. According to press, a company spokesperson said the incident woke us up to the need to take measures to prevent small animals like cats from sneaking in, which is something we had never anticipated before. Hexavalent chromium can cause skin irritation, respiratory problems, and blindness, and staff have to wear masks and rubber gloves when working near the substance. Officials say that as of Tuesday, there have been no reported sightings of the cat. A rocket that was supposed to become Japan's first from the private sector to put a satellite into orbit exploded shortly after takeoff Wednesday. Online videos showed the rocket called Kairos blasting off from Wakayama Prefecture in central Japan, a mountainous area filled with trees but exploding mid-air within seconds. A huge plume of smoke engulfed the area and flames shot up in some spots. The video then showed spots of water trying to put out the blaze. There were no reports of the injuries and the fire has been brought under control, according to the fire department in Kushimoto City. Wakayama Space One's Kairos rocket explodes after liftoff in a launch pad in Kushimoto, Wakayama Prefecture, Western Japan, Wednesday, March 13, 2024. Tokyo-based startup Space One behind the rocket launch did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Live footage on public broadcaster NHK relayed a voice announcing to the crowd gathered to watch the takeoff from a safe distance. NHK showed debris scattering from the sky and later charred pieces strewn about on the ground. The cause of the problems was still under investigation, according to NHK. The launch was already delayed several times, with the last postponement coming Saturday after a ship was spotted in a risk area, according to Japanese media reports. If it had succeeded, Space One would have been the first private company to put a rocket into orbit. Tokyo-based Space One was set up in 2018 with investments from major Japanese companies, including Canon Electronics, IHI, Shimizu, and major banks. Japan's main space exploration efforts has been led by the government's NASDA, which stands for the National Space Development Agency of Japan, this nation's equivalent of NASA of the U.S. The agency is now called JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. Wednesday's failure is likely to work as a setback for such private sector efforts. The rocket was supposed to have sent a satellite into orbit around Earth to gather various information. Some investors in a troubled trust fund in China are facing financial ruin under a government plan to return a fraction of their money. Casualties of a slump in the property industry and a broader economic slowdown, Sichuan Trust, headquartered in the southwest city of Chengdu, announced it was insolvent in 2020, stricken by sketchy accounting and failed investments in shopping malls and other projects. A deadline earlier this month to accept a 20% to 60% haircut or loss on their investment has left some investors in deep financial trouble, according to public announcements and interviews with 5 people affected. China's economy, the world's second largest, depends heavily on real estate development to drive growth and create jobs. Property prices and sales have languished after a crackdown on what leaders viewed as dangerous levels of borrowing, causing dozens of developers to default on their debts. At the National People's Congress session in Beijing last week, officials pledged to do more to protect investors. Premier Li Xiang said China would work to control risk and resolve the property crisis. For the people who put their life savings into Sichuan Trust and similar entities, it is likely too late. Around 300 or more than 8,000 investors refuse to accept a government plan and are looking for legal help. A relative of one investor said a few who attempted to come to Beijing during the Congress to air their grievances were blocked by police. The relative said the ruling Communist Party faces a dilemma. Debt is a problem, but falling home prices lead people to skimp on spending. That squeezes companies' sales, so they lay off workers and cut back on investment. The result, slowing growth and less wealth to go around. Inevitably, someone will end up losing out as China's debt crisis unwinds, said Tsinghua University finance professor Michael Patisse. Rescuers were responding to a suspected gas leak explosion Wednesday in a building in northern China that has killed 2 people and injured 26, authorities said. The explosion came early in the morning from a fried chicken shop in the city of Sanhe, authorities said in a short statement. The city is just an hour drive west of Beijing. Police cordoned off streets 1 kilometer out of the explosion, reporters saw, and were directing people away. Fire engines were still arriving at the scene as at 11 a.m. and a truck could be seen hauling away a burnt-out car with its windows gone. Pieces of the building's frame stood at a tilt above piles of rubble. Over 150 firefighters were sent to bring the flames under control, according to a national broadcaster, CCTV. Videos online showed smoke blowing out of a mid-commercial building in an intersection. A longtime ally of the late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been attacked outside his home in Lithuania. Leonid Volkov was assaulted with a hammer and tear gas while in his car in Vilnius. On Tuesday night, Navalny spokesperson Kira Yarmsh said the alleged assailant is unknown, as is their motive. Lithuanian police have been informed of the incident and are investigating, according to the press. Another member of the Navalny team, Ivan Danov posted pictures on social media of Mr. Volkov with a bloodied lower left leg and what looked like bruising to his temple. Asked whether the assailant had shouted anything, Mrs. Danov said everything happened in silence. Of course, this is a clear political attack. There is no doubt here. Mr. Volkov's wife said he had returned home from hospital with a broken hand or arm, adding that he was unable to walk because of the hammer blows to his leg. We will all work even more and with even greater anger, she posted on X, formerly known as Twitter. Mr. Volkov has lived outside Russia for some years for his own safety and served as Navalny's chief of staff until the opposition leader died suddenly in prison in the Russian Arctic last month while serving a 19-year sentence after being convicted of charges that were politically motivated. Mr. Volkov, 43, also faces various politically motivated charges in Russia. He served as chairman of Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation until last year. When he resigned following the revelation, he had signed letters calling for the European Union to drop some Russian sanctions. Despite living outside Russia, he has also made sure that the activism of Navalny and his team could continue. This has included anti-corruption investigations, YouTube videos, and live streams during protests and major events in Russia. Many more activists moved to join Mr. Volkov abroad in 2021 after Navalny's entire political organization was labeled extremist and banned in Russia. Several of Navalny's former team are now in prison, as well as some of his lawyers. With presidential elections this weekend, Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalnaya, has called on opponents of Vladimir Putin to turn up at polling stations across Russia at midday on Sunday in an act of peaceful political protest. It was an idea supported by Alexei Navalny before he died. Moscow has launched a wide-ranging campaign telling residents of occupied parts of Ukraine to vote in Russia's presidential election. For the first time, the national vote is taking place over 3 days, but additionally, early voting has already begun in the occupied parts of 4 Ukrainian regions: Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk. One resident complained of pro-Russian collaborators with ballot boxes going from house to house, looking for voters accompanied by armed soldiers. Vladimir Putin will certainly win another term of office, but a high turnout would help the Kremlin's effort to legitimize his continued rule. It would also be used to justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is one of 4 candidates on the ballot, but none of the others poses a realistic challenge. All of his most outspoken critics have either been forced into exile, jailed, or have died. 3 Ukraine-based Russian paramilitary groups say they have crossed into Russia and are now fighting government troops there. The Freedom of Russia Legion and Siberian Battalion posted videos purportedly showing their fighters in Russia, Belgorod and Kursk regions. The FRL and an exiled Russian politician claimed 2 villages were now in control of liberation forces. Russia's defense ministry said the breakthrough attempts were thwarted. It claimed more than 234 Ukrainian troops had been killed and several tanks had been destroyed. According to Belgorod's regional governor, Yaroslav Gladkov, one member of Russia's territorial defense forces was killed and 10 civilians were injured. These numbers have not yet been verified by the press. Ukraine's military denied any involvement in Tuesday's cross-border raids. Andrei Yusov, a spokesman for the country's military intelligence, said the paramilitary group were independent organizations of Russian nationals and therefore operating at home in a separate development. Russia said Ukraine had launched 25 drones on targets across Russia, but the attack was thwarted. However, videos have emerged which appear to show several Russian oil facilities on fire in the Ivanovo region just east of Moscow, and one II-76 military transport plane with 8 crew and 7 passengers crashed shortly after takeoff. Russia's defense ministry was quoted as saying by Russian state-run news agencies. The ministry said an engine fire caused the crash. It gave no details of survivors. Videos have emerged purportedly showing the plane on fire, circling in the sky, and later plumes of black smoke from the crash site. Elsewhere, at least 3 people were killed and 38 injured on Tuesday night when a Russian missile struck 2 apartment buildings in the central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih, according to the Minister of Internal Affairs. Ihor Klimenko said children were among the victims and that the number of deaths may go up as the search and rescue operation is continuing. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the country would inflict losses on the Russian state in a response, quite rightly. A 44-year-old man has pleaded not guilty to terror charges at the start of a trial for the murder of 2 people in a gun attack on on two bars in Oslo. A 3-minute police video was shown as the trial began, showing CCTV footage of how the 2022 attack unfolded outside the bars during Pride celebrations in the Norwegian capital. Passers-by are then seen wrestling suspect Zania Matapo to the ground. Prosecutors say the court will have to decide whether he was sane at the time. Police video from 3 closed-circuit cameras followed the movements of the gunman, dressed in a yellow t-shirt and a cap, as he walked past the first Papa Hunnet bar and the London pub, which are both popular with Oslo's gay community. He then began opening fire on people sitting outside at tables. 2 men aged 54 and 60 were fatally wounded in the rampage, and another 9 people suffered bullet wounds. A number of others were also hurt. In all, 19 bullets were fired. Police believe Oslo's LGBT community was targeted for extreme religious motives. The shooting took place as the Pride Festival neared an end in the early hours of 25th June 2022. As the video was shown, some of those inside the court were visibly shocked, according to Norwegian correspondents in the room. When Judge Eric asked if he was guilty of the charges, Zania Matapour shook his head and went on to ask why the trial was taking place during the month of Ramadan, the holiest month in the Muslim calendar. He complained that the court did not sit during the Christian holiday of Easter. "I have not perceived a conflict between the conduct of his trial and Ramadan," the judge replied. State prosecutor Sturla Henry Skro said the trial at Oslo's district court that the suspect had recorded an oath of allegiance to so-called Islamic State shortly before the attack. He detailed how in the hours before the shooting, the suspect had visited a mosque, then taken a taxi to central Oslo from the suburb of Jono before taking a train to the scene of the attack, carrying a sports bag. The prosecutor said the 44-year-old had been in trouble with police while still a teenager and had received psychiatric treatment at the time. Then he was reported to Norway's PST Police Security Service in 2016 because of concerns that he was becoming radicalized, he added. Since his arrest, Zania Matapour has refused to answer police questions and is not expected to speak in his defense during the trial. Months before the trial began, he was assessed as legally responsible for his actions, although one of the 3 aspects concluded that he was not. Controversial influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan can be extradited to the UK, a Romanian court has ruled. Andrew Tate, 37, and Tristan, 35, were detained on Monday in Bucharest after Bedfordshire police said it had obtained an arrest warrant. The brothers can be extradited only after the conclusion of their separate trial in Romania on human trafficking charges, a judge ruled. They have been released from custody. Speaking outside court, Andrew Tate said, "We are very innocent men, and in time everybody is going to see that. We are excited to finish this judicial process and clear our names." Outside his house on the outskirts of Bucharest, he later told the media the whole thing is garbage. The brothers, who categorically reject all charges, will remain under judicial controls in Romania, which prevent them from traveling outside the country. The brothers were detained and appeared in court in Bucharest on Tuesday after arrest warrants were issued by UK authorities before the next extradition was granted by the Court of Appeal in Bucharest. Bedfordshire police confirmed it had obtained the arrest warrant for 2 men in their 30s as part of an investigation into allegations of rape and human trafficking. "We understand this is a distressing subject and people may be impacted by what they are seeing in the news," the force said in a statement. According to the brothers' legal representatives, their allegations date back to 2012 to 2015. Speaking after they were released, one of their lawyers, Eugene Vidinek, said, "We appreciate the Bucharest Court of Appeal's decision to postpone the extradition of Andrew and Tristan Tate. This ruling provides an opportunity for the brothers to participate fully in their defense and for the legal process to proceed in a transparent manner." Romanian authorities are investigating separate allegations of rape, human trafficking, and forming a criminal gang. Charges against the brothers deny. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war in Gaza, the EU's foreign policy chief has claimed. Josep Borrell described the lack of aid entering the territory as a man-made disaster. A Spanish ship carrying desperately needed food supplies has left Cyprus for Gaza, but the UN says this cannot replace the delivery of aid by land. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has meanwhile vowed to press on with an offensive in southern Gaza. The quickest, most effective way to get aid into the territory is by road, but aid agencies say Israeli restrictions mean a fraction of what is needed in getting in. Attention has instead shifted towards alternative routes, including sea and air drops. Israel says it is not to blame for Gaza's food shortages, as it is allowing aid through 2 crossings in the south. But addressing the UN Security Council in New York on Tuesday, Mr. Borrell said the humanitarian crisis in the territory was as a result of a lack of viable land routes. "We are now facing a population fighting for their own survival," he said. Humanitarian assistance needs to get into Gaza, and the European Union is working as much as we can in order to make it possible. The humanitarian crisis is man-made, and when we look for alternative ways of providing support by sea, by air, we have to remind ourselves that we have to do it because the natural way of providing support through roads is being artificially closed. Salvation is being used as a war arm, and when we condemn this happening in Ukraine, we have to use the same words for what it is happening in Gaza. Failed asylum seekers are to be offered up to £3,000 to move to Rwanda under a new voluntary scheme. The plan is understood to be a variation of an existing voluntary return scheme where failed asylum seekers receive cash to return to their home country. It will be open to anyone whose asylum claim has been rejected by the UK. In particular, it is aimed at those who cannot return to their home countries. The government is already trying to implement a separate scheme under which people deemed to have arrived illegally in the UK will be deported to Rwanda. The plan had been blocked by the courts, which raised concerns about Rwanda's safety. In order to overcome those objections, the government is currently trying to pass its Safety of Rwanda bill, which would deem the East African country to be a safe place. The press has been told that unlike the scheme, this new arrangement would be voluntary and therefore not dependent on the bill being approved by the Parliament. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We return after this break.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-the-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
People into the country illegally. That is amazing.
Honorable
you human trafficker.
Honorable They are not picking our calls. They made up their minds.
So no agreement with the EU, but
from the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains. Through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
Welcome back. This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. The U.S. will send $300 million in military weapons to Ukraine, including ammunition, rockets, and anti-aircraft missiles, the White House has said. The surprise announcement comes as a bill in Congress to send further aid into Ukraine stalls amid partisan debate. The U.S. shipment, the first in nearly 3 months, is intended to prevent Ukraine from losing ground to Russia. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said this aid is now nowhere near enough to meet Ukraine's battlefield needs. This ammunition will keep Ukraine's guns firing for a period, but only for a short period. Mr. Sullivan told reporters on Tuesday, adding that it will not prevent Ukraine from running out of ammunition. The White House has been appealing to Congress for months to pass a budget that sends aid to Ukraine as well as Israel and Taiwan. A $60 billion aid bill has already passed the Senate, but has yet to face a vote in the House of Representatives. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has so far refused to consider the Senate bill. Mr. Johnson, an ally of Donald Trump, has said the House will vote on its own aid bill, but only after Congress passes a budget that overhauls the U.S. immigration system. On Tuesday, a group of bipartisan lawmakers in the House launched a long-shot position, an attempt to force the House to vote on the Senate bill using a rare procedural tactic that hasn't been successfully employed since 2015. Tuesday's emergency package of weapons and equipment comes from cost savings made in earlier Ukraine weapon contracts. The aid announcement came as President Joe Biden hosted Poland's president and prime minister at the White House in a show of support for Ukraine. Following the meeting, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk told reporters that he hopes Mr. Johnson is already aware that on his individual decision depends on the fate of millions of people. This is not some political skirmish that only matters here in America, he said. The absence of this positive decision of Mr. Johnson will really cost thousands of lives. Children, women, he must be aware of his personal responsibility. Also on Tuesday, Denmark announced that it would ship around $336 million in ammo and artillery to Ukraine. Ukraine has lost ground in recent months due to an artificial shortage of weapons, the country's president Volodymyr Zelensky said last month. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is considering American football quarterback Aaron Rodgers or former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura as his vice presidential running mate. They are still among others on a short list of potential nominees, Mr. Kennedy's campaign said on Tuesday. Campaign officials would not confirm who else is on the list. Mr. Kennedy, 70, launched a bid for president last year. He previously considering challenging Joe Biden for the Democratic Party nomination, and now as an independent faces a battle to get his name on the ballot in most or all 50 U.S. states. Mr. Kennedy, a member of America's most famous political family, worked as an environmental lawyer before founding an anti-vaccine pressure group. Mr. Rodgers, a star quarterback who currently plays for the New York Jets, was injured at the start of his first game last season but has vowed to return to the game in 2024. Off the field, he has been criticized for speaking about vaccine skepticism and making a number of controversial statements. Mr. Kennedy recently posted a picture of them hiking together. Lawyers for the Boeing employee turned whistleblower found dead by apparent suicide have hailed him as a brave, honest man of the highest integrity. Authorities are currently investigating the death of John Barnett from what appeared to be a self-inflicted wound. Mr. Barnett retired after working more than 30 years at Boeing in 2017. He was given evidence in a lawsuit against the company before his death. Two of his attorneys called on police to fully investigate how he had died. John was in the midst of a deposition in his whistleblower retaliation case, which finally was nearing the end. Robert Turkwitz and Brian Knowles said in a statement to the press, "He was in very good spirits and really looking forward to putting this phase of his life behind him and moving on. We didn't see any indication he would take his own life. No one can believe it," calling on officials in Charleston, South Carolina to provide more information about what happened. They wrote, "No detail can be left unturned." Mr. Turkwitz and Mr. Knowles added that Mr. Barnett was somebody who cared dearly about his family and his friends and Boeing, from its pilots to customers. From 2010 until his retirement on health grounds, Mr. Barnett worked as a quality manager at the North Charleston plant, making the 787 Dreamliner a state-of-the-art airliner used mainly on long-haul routes. Lawyers for Ghislaine Maxwell have argued that she should be set free under the terms of previous deal with federal prosecutors. Maxwell, 62, was found guilty of helping disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse young girls. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison in June 2022. Her lawyer, Diane Fabi Sampson, told a court in New York on Tuesday that the British socialite was covered in previous deal with prosecutors. But U.S. government attorney says that deal, which saw her boyfriend Epstein serve a light sentence for sex crimes, should not allow Maxwell to walk free. Maxwell's appeal does not relate to the facts laid out at her trial, but instead on the legal issues surrounding the agreement struck nearly 20 years ago. The crimes of Epstein, who mixed with some of the world's most famous people, were first reported in the media in 2005. In 2008, he made a deal with federal prosecutors that allowed him to plead guilty to state charges in Florida of soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution and serve 13 months in prison as part of his plea agreement, which was later criticized by a Justice Department internal report. Prosecutors agreed not to pursue his alleged co-conspirators. Following numerous lawsuits, Epstein was arrested again in 2019 in a federal case in New York. He was found dead in his jail cell before he could be tried on sex trafficking charges. His death was ruled a suicide. During Tuesday's hearing, Ms. Fabi Sampson called the Florida plea deal weird and unusual, but argued that it should have halted any further action against Maxwell. Prosecutors, however, have called the defense arguments cursory and undeveloped and say the deal has no bearing on Maxwell's case. During the hearing, they argued that the agreement was limited to the Florida district, where Epstein pleaded guilty. Maxwell was convicted in New York, where Tuesday's appeal hearing was held. Throughout the course of Maxwell's 2022 trial, 4 women testified that they had been abused as minors at Epstein's homes in Florida, New York, New Mexico, and the Virgin Islands. They recounted how Maxwell had talked them into giving Epstein massages, which turned sexual, luring them with gifts and promises about how Epstein could use his money and connections to help them. During her trial, a judge rejected attempts to throw out the case, including an argument by Maxwell's lawyers that juror had failed to inform the court that he had been abused as a child. The judge also rejected arguments that Maxwell had not been allowed to prepare adequately for her trial and that prosecutors had waited too long to bring their case against her. The appeals court judgment will be handed down at a later date. 2 federal detectives have been found unharmed after they went missing in Mexico's Pacific Coast state of Guerrero while investigating the appearances of 43 students almost 10 years ago. Officials did not say Tuesday how the man and woman were found or whether they had been freed from captivity. President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador mentioned their disappearances over the weekend at his daily news briefing, noting, "I hope this is not related to those who do not want us to find the youths." The disappearances were the latest sign of what appeared to be generalized as a breakdown in law and order in Guerrero State, home to the resort of Acapulco. The state has been dogged for a decade by the disappearances of 43 students from a rural teachers' college in Guerrero in 2014, who are believed to have been abducted by local officials and turned over to a drug gang to be killed. Students at that college, located in Tixla, north of Acapulco, have a long history of demonstrating and clashing with police, and last week a student was shot to death in what police said was a confrontation with students riding in a stolen car. One of the police officers involved in that shooting had been detained and placed under investigation in the case after the president described the shooting as an abuse of authority and confirmed the dead student had not fired any gun. But Lopez Obrador acknowledged Tuesday that the state police officer detained in the case had escaped from the state custody before being turned over to federal prosecutors. The president suggested that Guerrero State Police had not properly guarded their colleague, saying arrest protocols had not been followed, adding the confusion to the state prosecutor's office denied Tuesday that the officer had ever been in custody. And there was little evidence that the president's pledges to investigate last week's shooting or the fate of the missing 43 would placate the students' traditionally violent protests. Colombia Supreme Court on Tuesday selected the nation's new Attorney General following a month of deliberations. They were interrupted by protests outside the court and complaints from President Gustavo Petro's supporters, who argued the judges were stonewalling his nominees. Ultimately, the court selected Luz Adriana Camargo, a seasoned prosecutor with few political ties, as the country's lead prosecutor, with 18 of the 23 judges voting in favor. The Attorney General in Colombia must be ratified by a two-thirds majority of the country, whose members are elected by the judicial branch. Camargo will lead the Attorney General's office, a branch of the Colombian state that has been long criticized for favoring its political allies and pursuing criminal investigations for political ends. Though she is known to have worked closely with Colombia's defense minister, observers are hoping that Camargo can make the Attorney General's office more independent and impartial. Throughout her career, she has been known for her independence from political powers, said Judge Restrepo, a political analyst who directs the Bogota-based SERAC think tank. She doesn't come from a political party and she hasn't been part of any government cabinet, and that sets her apart from her predecessors. Camargo is an experienced prosecutor who led investigations in the early 2000s against lawmakers accused of being elected with the support of right-wing paramilitary group. She also served in the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, a group founded by the UN and investigated corruption cases and war crimes in the Central American country. During her time in Guatemala, Camargo worked closely with Colombian Defense Minister Iván Velázquez, who then directed the anti-corruption group. As the nation's lead prosecutor, Camargo will oversee numerous cases that involve the nation's armed group, but also high-profile corruption cases, including an ongoing probe into the financing of Petro's presidential campaign, in which the president's eldest son, who is currently under house arrest, has been accused of money laundering. Former Honduras First Lady Ana Garcia de Hernandez said Tuesday, just days after her husband's U.S. drug trafficking conviction, that she plans to seek country's presidents next year. Ex-President Juan Orlando Hernandez was convicted of conspiring with drug traffickers moving tons of cocaine to the United States in a federal court in Manhattan Friday. On Tuesday, his wife said in a news conference, "I want to tell you that from this moment, I will start an active and proactive fight for the world to know the injustice that was committed." She said she would do so by seeking the nomination of Hernandez's National Party. Hernandez, who maintained his innocence throughout his trial, could be sentenced to life in prison. "I know what has to be done. I know the job. I know the dedication and the fight my husband has had every day, and I know Honduras great needs, and one of the greatest is the injustice we've just seen," Garcia de Hernandez said. Marco Eluid Gueron, a lawmaker from the ruling Liberal Party, said that Garcia de Hernandez could run, but asserted that she surely knew of her husband's ties to drug traffickers. He suggested her entry into politics had more to do with reducing her own legal exposure. Hernandez was arrested at his home in Tegucigalpa, the Honduran capital, 3 months after leaving office in 2022, and was extradited to the U.S. in April of that year. And that's the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. Sudan, army recaptures headquarters of state broadcaster in Omdurman. Gaza, Israeli hostage actually killed in 7 October. Hamas attacks. Japan, residents warned to stay away from chemical-soaked cat. Ukraine, 3 paramilitary groups cross into Russia, fight government forces. United States government to send $300 million in military weapon to Ukraine. Mexico, 2 federal detectives found unharmed after they went missing. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms. On X, Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube, Atlantic Television Network, Instagram, Atlantic TV Network. Do remember that peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring honest